Well, again, I'm just very grateful to be here and talk about this poem. Four Quartets is a great work of use of language and a great Christian poem. I would say that it is a difficult poem to see orderliness in, to see unity in. I was struck by Father Eric's discussion of the Psalms, and then even Jess or Ted mentioned the haphazard nature of that book. And, we come to that book, wanting to see the whole, wanting to see some unity in that work. And we realize that we see a bunch of different things. And it brings to mind the kind of the problem of thinking of things as one, coming to a confidence that things are actually brought together. And I think that this is one of the things that Eliot was working on his entire life. I think I imagine him, the Four Quartets were written in a time just before and then bridging World War II. And a part of the poem was written at a time when he was what was called a fire watcher. He was an employee at this publishing company called Faber & Faber, and they apparently had a building that had a certain height in London. And he played the role of a guy who would spend a shift up on the top of the roof, and he would be looking out at London as the Blitz was happening, and he would look to see, a bomb drop, and he would be able to go over there and also notify the people who needed to go and address that. And part of the poem, The Little Gidding, is him kind of reenacting that part of the experience in a very poetic way. And I imagine him thinking of his own life and all of the parts of the life and the different things that seem all disconnected. His youth in America, his kind of mid-20 period of time with a community of these modernist poets, his own disjointed personal experience with a marriage, and asking the question is, how does this all fit together? Does this fit together as one thing? And I have had that experience myself when I think back on my own life and what is the connection between that guy who was a high school student and this, the other one that that traveled somewhere when I was in my 20s and then met this person, and then that relationship is no longer part of my life. And how does that all put together? How does that become this thing that I am? And so the problem of the unity of things is, I think, one of the things that Eliot really struggled with, and one of the things that he tried to work out in Four Quartets. I think of Jonathan Pageau's constantly referring to things like cups, when he says that, the cup, how do we call this a cup? It's got all these parts, an infinite number of parts. And I understand what he's getting at, but I'm not quite sure it's the right example, because the cup is pretty obviously one thing. And I don't necessarily think we struggle to understand how that comes together. But our own histories, our own persons, that's much more difficult to see as a unity. And maybe even more grandly, our own participation in the entirety of humanity. How is that one thing? And so that then becomes, I think, part of the struggle that Eliot is trying to deal with in his own kind of patchwork experience of all these cultural artifacts that were so meaningful to him. And he experienced them very meaningfully in their individual, particularity. And yet, how do I bring that together? How do I make that one thing? And I think he saw himself as having struggled with that and perhaps failed or maybe even indulged in the disjointedness of things when he was a young man, and indulged in offering that as a kind of set piece that people could marvel at. The Wasteland is really that kind of a thing. It's almost in a deep level a thing of ego and a thing of arrogance to put that up and say, look at how I can do this degenerate thing in front of you, this thing that is a patchwork that I'm declaring itself to be plural and not one. And I think he moved towards the four quartets as a way of redeeming that, as a way of trying to bring things back together and make them one. And yet I think he had a problem because he had this patchwork. He had, we are this kind of patchwork, but I think he had in a way created a kind of image of himself and a voice that had indulged in that kind of disjointed way of speaking. And I'm not sure he knew how to pull all the parts back together. And approaching writing the four quartets, I think, was a kind of intentional effort to bring things back together, but bringing them back together now with the knowledge that we start in the middle, we start having, let's say, emerged into this plurality, and it's all a plurality. And now we have to rebuild it. We have to somehow see it as one. And so when he approached writing the four quartets, I think he brought to it some artificial structure. He brought to it some intentional ways of structuring it so that he could kind of force on it a kind of order. And the first thing that he, I think, came to was something that came to him from music. Beethoven sonatas turned out to be something that Eliot was very interested in the 30s. The late Beethoven sonatas, they're very full of pathos, and they have a very specific structure, it turns out. Let me just read this quote from Eliot about this, and then I'll tell you about what that structure is and how it relates to the four quartets. He's writing to a friend of his named Stephen Spender, and they're talking about the late Beethoven, the late quartets, and he says this: I am delighted to hear that you have been at the late Beethoven. I have the A minor quartet on the gramophone and find it quite inexhaustible to study. There is a sort of heavenly, or at least more than human gaiety about some of his later things, which one imagines might come to oneself as the fruit of reconciliation and relief after immense suffering. I should like to get something of that into verse once before I die. So he is thinking about these quartets and what they're doing structurally. And I think he intentionally takes this structure. It's almost arbitrary that he chooses this as the way to structure the poem, but he needs something. He needs some way to put it together and make it one. So he chooses this. And this is where I would have a slide, but I'll just describe it to you. A quartet, a string quartet, has, four voices. That's why it's a quartet. But you'll notice an odd thing about most of the late Beethoven quartets, and that is that they have 5 movements, not four movements. So it's like, well, where did that come from? Well, it was just the choice that Beethoven made, and for the most part, the quartets after Beethoven took on that form. They would have 5 movements, and the movements would have a certain duration structure. The first 3 of the movements would be kind of medium duration, and then the 4th would be short, very noticeably shorter than the other ones, and then you'd go back to another longer length conclusion. And Eliot structures the four quartets around this. He's got the four quartets. Each one of them have five movements essentially, and the fourth movement is a short, intentionally short offering, let's say. And so you can see then this intentional way of kind of forcing up an order onto it. And he does four quartets, and each one of them have the same shape. One of the things that does is it orders the structure as Jess had described that Job is ordered, but it also mirrors, I think, in a way, the structure of, here we go again with the Divine Comedy. The Divine Comedy, you can see in the Divine Comedy that Dante forces a very intentional order on that poem. You have the three canticles, you have 33 cantos in each one. That adds up to the wrong number, 99, and we add the 34th canto of the Inferno, and we get 100. And so you have threes all over the place, very Christian number, of course, and you have then a round total number of 100. One of the things that does is it allows for I think they call it a horizontal reading, or a reading of Dante where you take the canto in the Inferno and you can compare it, or you can notice that there's something else similar going on in the canto, the same canto in the Purgatorio and then in the Paradiso. So you can have this order that extends beyond that individual canticle and allows you to see through to the other end. This is a similar thing that Eliot does with the four quartets. You've got the four poems. They all have five movements, and those five movements can now refer to each other through as you move forward in the poem. But he needed more vehicles to introduce order. So he thought of the four voices of the quartet. Some people have tried to look in the quartets for personas that might be talking in each one or something like that. I don't think that works, but he did introduce another structure of order by focusing each of the movements on the four elements: air, earth, water, and fire. So now you can see he's starting to kind of create a landscape in which he can bring these things together and kind of impose this kind of order on this chaotic subject matter that he is going to be discussing. I'm going to move towards reading sections to try to illustrate some of this, but I want to outline other kind of dualities that Eliot is, let me see if I can find this now. Going to focus on as he here it is, as he introduced the subject matter, let's say, of the poem. And they are the ones that you might imagine someone like Eliot would be talking about. The dualities between the infinite and the finite, the duality between the transient and the eternal. And you will see between the particular and the universal, between movement that is linear and movement that is circular, between and those are the main ones that we want to hear when we hear the voices in the poem. Before I move on, let's see, what else do we want to talk about? He also structures the poem around places. And places are both very particular, and the places that we have in the poem are very much particular to Eliot. So, for example, each of the poems is named after a place. The first poem is named Burnt Norton. Burnt Norton was a manor house with a garden that Eliot visited. It's an abandoned house, and the garden then becomes the theme, the actual setting of the first poem. And that has meaning both because it is a particular, it's just something that Eliot had in his life, an event that had in his life, but it also becomes a symbol, becomes a place that has a universal suggestion of a universal concept. And the same is true with East Coker. East Coker is a place that he knew and visited. It's a small town, but it's also, so it's a very particular place, but it's also the source of his own family. His ancestral family came from this place, so now it's both a particular and a universal, and it serves that function in the poem. Dry Salvages, which is the third of the four poems, is a rock outcropping off the coast of northeast United States, place he used to sail around, but it's also a rock that is ultimately going to be a symbol of this kind of solidity of the foundations of the earth. And then finally, Little Gidding, which is the fourth of the poems, is a church, an Anglican church that had a rich history in England, a church that he visited, but also a church that has this rich history of being a kind of monastic community that was a refuge for the Anglican Church in a time of great turmoil. So we can see a kind of sense of stability in a church surrounded by a chaotic world. So now, to try to illustrate some of these ideas, I'm going to read from a number of it's very difficult to kind of think about reading from the beginning of the poem through and try to explain what's happening. So instead, I'm gonna start, I think, by just reading the first section of the first poem and talk to you about the way in which these features that I just described appear. So let me read that. It's just the first section. It won't take me very long to read it, and then I can talk through the way these things appear. And what we're going to hear here is the musings of a man like Eliot. So we're hearing the inner thoughts, let's say, of Eliot, but we are also in a very particular place. We're walking into a garden, and part of this is going to be describing walking into and then leaving a garden. Time present and time past are both perhaps present in time future, and time future contained in time past. If all time is eternally present, all time is unredeemable. What might have been is an abstraction remaining a perpetual possibility only in a world of speculation. What might have been and what has been point to one end, which is always present. Footfalls in the memory, down the passage which we did not take towards the door we never opened into the rose garden. My words echo thus in your mind. But to what purpose disturbing the dust on the bowl of rose leaves, I do not know. Other echoes inhabit the garden. Shall we follow? Quick, said the bird. Find them, round the corner, through the first gate, into our first world. Shall we follow the deception of the thrush into our first world? There they were, dignified, invisible, moving without pressure over the dead leaves in the autumn heat through the vibrant air. And the bird called in response to the unheard music in the shrubbery, and the unseen eye-beam crossed to the roses for the roses had the look of flowers that are looked at. There they were as our guests, accepted and accepting as we moved, and they in a formal pattern along the empty alley into the box circle to look down into the drained pool. The pool, dry concrete, brown edged, and the pool was filled with water out of sunlight, and the lotus rose quietly, the surface glinted out of heart of light, and they were behind us, reflected in the pool. Then the cloud passed, and the pool was empty. Go, said the bird, for the leaves were full of children, hidden excitedly, containing laughter. Go, 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 said the bird. Humankind cannot bear very much reality. Time past and time future, what might have been and what has been point to one end, which is always present. So that's, when there's two things that I remember back to when I first read lines like that. And one was that it was just luxuriously enthralling to hear it. I don't know if anyone else gets that response, but it just feels like this is good language, good use of language, but also a bit of uncertainty as to what in the heck we're talking about here. So let me try to help with that. First off, we're walking into a garden, and then we are escorted out, or perhaps we're even pushed out, or we're exiled from the garden. What is this business about what might have been and what has been point to one end, which is always present? Now that's talked about in very abstract terms as like, what the heck is that? But we think back to what happened in a very epical garden, and we realize that what we experience now, we emerge into the middle. We come out of the dark world. We are in the middle way. And that means we're in the fallen world. And the fallen world around us is obviously what has been. That is to say, what we experience in the world is what has actually happened. And that makes up the world we are in. And yet in it is also this sense that it's fallen. And it being fallen must come from it being not which might have been, that which might have been. What might have been, of course, would have been that we didn't fall. And the fact we can't know the world as fallen without also knowing that ever present in our understanding of our present world is the fact that it doesn't match up to what might have been, that ideal that we might have been experiencing had there not been a fall. So in a way, the fact that the present is full of both what has been and what might have been. And that is then reflected, and then the bird, I believe, is ushering us out of the garden. We are banished from the garden. And we cannot bear too much reality. We cannot bear the knowledge of good and evil. So you can now read that last few verses in that light. You can say, then the cloud passed and the pool was empty. We had just experienced this glorious vision of a full garden, and a pool full of light and the fullness of an experience. And then the cloud passes and it's lost to us. The surface glinted out of heart of light, and they were behind us, perhaps an image of the prior inhabitants of the garden, who we were before the fall. And there they were behind us, reflected in the pool. Then the cloud passed and the pool was empty. Go, said the bird, for the leaves are full of children, hidden excitedly, containing laughter. Go, 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 said the bird. Humankind cannot bear very much reality. Time past and time future. What might have been and what has been point to one end, which is always present. So here we then have what we are presently experiencing. And that's Burnt Norton. The thematic through line of Burnt Norton is this spiritual experience that we have as in the fallen world. Burnt Norton, have to get into it deeper to get to this sense of it, but Burnt Norton is the poem of air. And air, of course, is a quality. We talked about qualities before. Air is not a physical substance. It's a quality, and the air is spirit. The air is at least in Eliot's way of internalizing it or expressing it, is consciousness, is thinking, is mind, is the spirit of the human being. East Coker is the poem of Earth, and of course, Earth again. We miss this sense of the four elements when we think of them as elements. It's the wrong word for them. They're qualities. Earth is solidity. Earth is the ground out of which we come. Earth is fertility and life and death. And the cycle of that is within the earth, our relationship with the earth. And that is not just dirt or some material substance. That's not what we're talking about. And so I'll read the first section of East Coker, and I want to kind of listen for the resonances to that notion. Think generations, think your individual experience with coming into being and death potentially, but also the fact that you are the manifestation of many generations that go back, that have turned over, and that the future will hold that same kind of cycle. In my beginning is my end. In succession, houses rise and fall, crumble, are extended, are moved, destroyed, restored, or in their place is an open field, or a factory, or a bypass. Old stone to new buildings, old timbers to new fires, old fires to ashes, and ashes to earth, which is already flesh, fur and feces, bone of man and beast, cornstalk and leaf. Houses live and die. There is a time for building and a time for living and for generation, and a time for the wind to break the loosened pane and to shake the wainscot where the field mouse trots, and to shake the tattered arras woven with a silent motto. In my beginning is my end. Now the light falls across the open field, leaving the deep lane shuttered with branches, dark in the afternoon. I didn't mention this is East Coker, the town from which he comes from. He's walking into this town, and we're going with him into the town. Across the open field, leaving the deep lane shuttered with branches, dark in the afternoon, where you lean against a bank as a van passes, and the deep lane insists on the direction into the village, in the electric heat, hypnotized. In a warm haze, the sultry light is absorbed, not reflected by gray stone. Wait for the early owl. In that open field, if you do not come too close, on a summer midnight, you can hear the music of the weak pipe and the little drum and see them dancing around the bonfire. An association of man and woman in dancing, signifying matrimony, a dignified and commodious sacrament, two and two, necessary conjunction, holding each other by the hand or the arm, which betokeneth concord. Round and round the fire, leaping through the flames, or joined in circles, rustically solemn, or in rustic laughter, lifting heavy feet in clumsy shoes, earth feet, loom feet, lifted in country mirth, mirth of those living since under earth, nourishing the mirth of those long since under earth, nourishing the corn, keeping time, keeping the rhythm in their dancing, as in their living and in the living seasons, the time of the seasons and the constellations, the time of milking and the time of harvest, the time of the coupling of man and woman and of beasts. Feet rising and falling, eating and drinking, dung and death. Dawn points, and another day prepares for heat and silence. Out at the sea, the dawn wind wrinkles and slides. I am here, or there, or elsewhere in my beginning. So I don't know that I need to add too much to that. There's this sense of earthiness, a sense of kind of pastoral community as origin. There's lots of references that maybe aren't that interesting. The tattered arras woven with a silent motto is a reference to a queen who, Stuart queen, who had that on an arras that she would have as part of her marker. There's lots of that to talk about, but I'm not sure it's terribly that it helps us that much. So we move to dry salvages, which is themed water, has a water theme. Of course, water is, I want to think of a cosmic image here. If you think of the cosmos, and I'd definitely take somebody's input on this one, but if you think of the cosmic, the medieval or even before cosmic image that we hear in the creation story in Genesis, we have Earth being brought up out of the deep, and particularly if you think of England, you can think that Earth is kind of resting on an infinite sea, if you will. And so surrounding the island of England is a sea, okay? Or surrounding humanity's earthly dwelling place is this sea. And of course, on this land, there's water which is raised up and taken up into the mountains and comes back down in the form of rivers. And so rivers are kind of a sense of the linear time, a sense of movement that is constant, that is linear in the sense of the past being shelled off into an unrepeatable fixed reality, and the future an open potential. But always the river is running into the sea. Always the river is running into the infinite surrounding infinity or eternality. Now, I'm going to take a little bit of an excursus here, and I'm going to read just a number of different poems from a number of different places. And I want to see these different things. They don't really connect to the dry salvages section that I'm going to read, but they do. And they are poems about water, poems about the mariner experience, or the experience that we have with water. And they all, I think, are running around in Eliot's head. And as we hear them, we can see, I think, the way in which he tries to bring these things together. Here is from The Tempest. There's a guy who's sitting on a beach, and he is thinking that his dad is dead. He thinks his dad went down with the ship. And obviously a very touching moment, and a very famous and Shakespeare and Dante. And it's a very short thing, but it's really, really good use of language. And it goes like this, He's thinking of his father, and his father having drowned. Full fathom 5 thy father lies. Oh, his bones are coral made. Those are pearls that were his eyes. Nothing of him that doth fade, but doth suffer a sea change into something rich and strange. Sea nymphs hourly ring his knell. Ding dong, hark. Now I hear them, ding dong, bell. It's actually Ariel. It's another character talking to this young man whose father had died. It seems like what we're talking about is someone at the bottom of the sea who's lost, but it's really actually talking about a transformation of that person. There's a kind of sense of the possibility of transformation through death in the lines that go, nothing of him that doth fade, but doth suffer a sea change into something rich and strange. So that's just one line. I know Eliot thought about this. He used this in other places. I don't think it's specifically referenced in Dry Salvages, but he did use it. Here is Tennyson's Ulysses, which is just a reworking of the Ulysses mythic story. I think he is taking on the Dante version of that in this poem, a great romantic poem, of the Carpe Diem kind of type, in which he imagines himself thinking he would want to be Ulysses going off on another adventure. That ever with a frolic welcome took the thunder and the sunshine, and opposed free hearts, free foreheads. You and I are old. Old age hath yet its honor and its toil. Death comes, death closes all, but something ere the end. Some work of noble note may yet be done, not unbecoming men that strove with gods. The light began to twinkle from the rocks. The long day wanes, the slow moon climbs, the deep moans around with many voices. Come, my friends, 'tis not too late to seek a newer world. Push off, and sitting well in order smite the sounding furrows. For my purpose holds to sail beyond the sunset and the baths of all the western stars until I die. And it may be that the gulfs will wash us down. It may be we shall touch the happy isles and see the great Achilles whom we knew. Though much is taken, much abides. And though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are, and equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. And one more, total change. Ophelia. Ophelia in Hamlet drowns. His mother comes and describes that drowning. She drowns out of despair. Sense that she might have committed suicide, but it really isn't described as that. And it's obviously a very touching moment in the poem. Ophelia was Hamlet's love interest. They were in love prior to the action of the play, and things go bad because of all sorts of things. And she kind of goes mad, and then she ends up going out into the meadows. She creates a garland out of flowers, and she wants to hang it on a tree. The first few sentences here are going to be about that. She starts to reach out to put this halo on a branch. The branch breaks. She falls into the water. She has a lot of clothing on, so she floats for a while, and then she ultimately sinks. There on the pendant boughs her cornet weeds, clamoring to hang, an envious silver brook, when down her weedy trophies and her fell in the weeping brook. Her clothes spread wide, and the mermaid-like, while they bore her up. Her clothes spread wide and mermaid-like, while they bore her up. Which time she chanted snatches of old tunes, as one incapable of her own distress, or like a creature native and endowed unto that element. But long it could not be, till her garments, heavy with their drink, pulled the poor wretch from her melodious lay into muddy death. Now that's just a taste of water imagery. And now I'm going to read this first section of Dry Salvages. I do not know much about gods, but I think that the river is a strong brown god, sullen, untamed, intractable, patient to some degree, at first recognized as a frontier, useful, untrustworthy as a conveyor of commerce, then only a problem confronting the builder of bridges. A problem once solved, the brown god is almost forgotten by the dwellers in cities, ever, however, implacable, keeping his seasons and rages, destroyer, reminder of what men choose to forget, unhonored, unpropitiated by worshippers of the machine, but waiting, watching and waiting. His rhythm is present in the nursery bedroom, in the rank galanthus of the April dooryard, in the smell of grapes on the autumn table, and the evening circle in the winter gaslight. The river is within us. The sea is all about us. The sea is the land's edge also, the granite into which it reaches, the beaches where it tosses its hints of earlier and other creation. The starfish, the horseshoe crab, the whale's backbone, the pools where it offers to our curiosity the more delicate algae and the sea anemone. It tosses up our losses, the torn seine, the shattered lobster pot, the broken oar, and the gear of foreign dead men. The sea has many voices, many gods and many voices. The salt is on the briar rose, the fog is in the fir trees. Roses are an image for Eliot of transient beauty, and the yew tree is an evergreen that lasts forever, does not change in seasons, and they plant them at the doors of churches in the Anglican tradition in England. Many gods and many voices. The salt is on the briar rose, the fog is in the fir trees. The sea howl and the sea yelp are different voices, often together heard, the whining in the rigging, the menace and caress of waves that break on waters, the distant rote in the granite teeth, and the wailing warning from the approaching headland, as are all sea voices, and the heavy groaner rounding homeward, and the seagull. And under the oppression of the silent fog, the tolling bell, measured time, not our time, rung by an unhurried groundswell, a time older than time of chronometers, older than time counted by anxious, worried women lying awake, calculating the future, trying to unweave, unwind, unravel, and piece together the past and the future, between midnight and dawn, when the past is all deception, the future futureless, before the morning watch, when time stops and time is never ending, and the groundswell that is and was from the beginning clangs the bell. I'm going to move to a section of Little Gidding. I don't know, where am I at time here?
You're good. You got probably another 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll break. We'll do some poems and then lunch. So.
Well, I'm not going to be able to get to some of the stuff I wanted to, but I'm going to read this, which is in this same theme. So now we've moved to the sea, and I'll just read this. Lady whose shrine stands on the promontory, pray for all those who are in ships, those whose business has to do with fish, and those concerned with every lawful traffic, and those who conduct them. Repeat a prayer also on behalf of women who have seen their sons or husbands setting forth and not returning. Figlia de tau figlio, Queen of Heaven. Also pray for those who were in ships and ended their voyage in the sand, in the sea's lips, or in the dark throat, which will not reject them, or whenever or wherever cannot reach them the sounds of the sea bells, perpetual Angelus. And I guess if I'm coming close to the times.
No, keep going.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's Dry Salvages, and you can see obviously we're sticking with this theme of kind of ordering this around these elements and making them obviously much more than simply, kind of physical elements, but the way in which that plays into our lives. Little Gidding is the fourth of the poems. It is a church in England where the Anglicans had a kind of refuge from the turmoil before the English Civil War, And the King Charles I actually took refuge there after he had been defeated and had his impending execution by the Republican forces. And so this was obviously a very important kind of symbol for Eliot, because he was obviously a Christian. He saw the church as a kind of universal place, a place that was always the same and offered the same consistent a place of abiding, place of refuge. And this is also the poem of fire. And fire, of course, is a transformative thing, a destructive thing, but of course in Christian imagery is also the purgative thing, and brings us through to the possibility of redemption through the Pentecostal fire. I think I'll just read this and see where we end up. Let me prep this a little bit. Wintertime is where we are at the beginning of this. We're going to be heading towards this church, but we're in the winter. And yet, despite that, there is a day of brilliant sunlight, brilliant light, very much echoing the light in the Paradiso of Dante, the brilliant, unseeable light, the blinding light of the beatific vision. So he's kind of going to marry this up by evoking the notion of a midwinter spring, meaning we're in the middle of winter, but there's this moment of life that comes from the light. Midwinter spring is its own season, sempiternal, meaning eternal, essentially. Midwinter spring is its own season, sempiternal, though sodden towards sundown, suspended in time between pole and tropic, when the short day is brightest with frost and fire. The brief sun flames the ice on pond and ditches in windless cold that is the heart's heat, reflecting in the watery mirror a glare that is blindness in the early afternoon. The glow, more intense than blaze of branch or brazier, stirs the dumb spirit. No wind, but Pentecostal fire in the dark time of the year. Between melting and freezing, the soul's sap quivers. There is no earth smell or smell of living thing. This is the springtime, but not in time's covenant. Now the hedgerow is blanched for an hour with transitory blossom of snow, a bloom more sudden than that of summer, neither budding nor fading, not in the scheme of generations. Where is the summer, the unimaginable zero summer? If you came this way, taking the route that you would be likely to take from the place where you would be likely to come from, if you came this way in Maytime, you would find the hedges white again in May with voluptuary sweetness. It would be the same at the end of the journey. If you came at night like a broken king, if you came by day-night knowing what you came for, it would be the same when you leave the rough road and turn behind the pigsty to the dull facade and the tombstone. And what you thought you came for is only a shell, a husk of meaning, from which the purpose breaks only when it is fulfilled, if at all. Either you had no purpose, or the purpose is beyond the end you figured and is altered in fulfillment. There are other places which also are the world's end, some at the sea jaws or over the dark lane in the desert or a city. But this is the nearest, in place and time, now and in England. If you came this way, taking any route, starting from anywhere, at any time, or at any season, it would always be the same. You would have to put off sense and notion. You are not there to verify. Instruct yourself, or inform curiosity, or carry report. You are there to kneel where prayer has been valid. And prayer is more than just an order of words, the conscious occupation of the praying mind, or the sound of the voice praying, or what the dead had no speech for. When living, they can tell you, being dead. The communion of the dead is tongued with fire beyond the language of the living. Here, the intersection of the timeless moment is England and nowhere, never and always. So there is trying to come to a conclusion about this. I really think that on the one hand, you can think Eliot is trying very hard to take these moments that he's got, these sense that he can elaborate this kind of set piece of intense emotion and meaning, and trying to put it into some sort of order, sort of make it mean something, or make it one, make it a whole. And I think he does a very noble job at it. And I would like to finish with reading two parts of Little Gidding being the last of the poems. And I do think that there is this trajectory that I was trying to explain to you yesterday, where he comes from a place of, of not being able to put the fragments together, to a place where he ultimately does in a real Christian faith. One is a comparison. Let's see, how much time do I have, do you think? 10 minutes?
10 minutes.
10 minutes. All right, I'm going to do this. One way he does that is by talking about the use of words. So in the early part of the poem, he will say things like this about words. So here I am in the middle way, having had 20 years largely wasted. The years of l'entre-deux-guerres, between the wars, trying to use words, and every attempt is a wholly new start and a different kind of failure, because one has only learnt to get the better of words for the thing one no longer has to say, or the way in which one is no longer disposed to say it. So he's talking about the difficulty of words at trying to achieve achieve something, achieve anything, trying to be able to say something. And he's expressing the difficulty of that. Here's another version of that same thing, again, early in the poem. The stillness, as the Chinese jar still moves perpetually in its stillness, not the stillness of the violin while the note lasts, not that only, but the coexistence, or say that the end precedes the beginning, and the end and the beginning are always there before the beginning and after the end. And all is always now. Words strain, crack, and sometimes break under the burden, under the tension, slip, slide, perish, decay with imprecision, will not stay in place, will not stay still. Shrieking voices, scalding, mocking, or mere chattering always assail them. The word, and that's capitalized, the word in the desert is most attacked by voices of temptation, and the crying shadow in the funeral dance, and the loud lament of the disconsolate chimera. So again, a little bit of a lament about the possibility of words to actually come together and be what we want them to be. And now at the end, he comes together with this, and I believe it's another commitment, a commitment to the fact that words can work for us, that words can achieve what we want them to. So this is this evolution that I'm trying to point to. What we call the beginning is often the end. And to make an end is to make a beginning. The end is always where we start from. And every phrase and sentence that is right, every word is at home, taking its place to support the others. The word neither diffident nor ostentatious, an easy commerce of the old and new. The common word exact without vulgarity, the formal word precise but not pedantic, the complete consort dancing together. Every phrase and every sentence is an end and a beginning, every poem an epitaph, and any action is a step to the block, to the fire, down the sea's throat, or to the illegible stone. And that is where we start from. We die with the dying. See, they depart, and we go with them. We are born with the dead. See, they return, and bring them with us. The moment of the rose and the moment of the yew tree are of equal duration. A people without history is not redeemed from time, for history is a pattern of timeless moments. So while the light fails on the winter's afternoon in a secluded chapel, history is now in England. And this will be the finish of the poem that comes to follow, and I think is his attempt to bring all of this together into completion. With the drawing of this love and the voice of this calling, we will not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. Through the unknown, unremembered gate, when the last of earth left to discover is that which was the beginning. At the source of the longest river, the voice of the hidden waterfall, and the children in the apple tree, not known because not looked for, but heard, half heard, in the stillness between two waves of the sea, quick, now, here, now, always, a condition of complete simplicity, costing not less than everything. And all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well, when the tongues of flame are infolded into the crowned knot of fire, and the fire and the rose are one.